ANZ, which is the top arranger of, well, top-ranked arranger, I should say, of syndicated loans in the Asia-Pacific. John Corrin is their global head of syndicated loans, and he's in Shanghai. John, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, how would you characterize the first 6 months in your business?
Yeah, the first 6 months has been a little bit disappointing, but we have to remember that 2011 was a really fantastic year for the market. And it's not all bad news in the debt markets because, as you mentioned earlier, the bond market has been very strong in the first half of 2012. So I would say a little bit of rebalancing, and that we'll probably see more issuance in the loan market and perhaps slightly less issuance in the bond market, as perhaps some of those problems in the Eurozone have an impact upon Asian borrowers.
What is your biggest concern, though, when it comes to the second half of the year? We've got, I believe, loans maturing of in the magnitude of $114 billion from in Asian corporate loans maturing, what, before the end of next year. How do we get that refinanced? Can we get it refinanced?
Yeah, the market's in pretty good shape. I think one of the things that people should be cognizant of is the fact that the Asia-Pacific market has become very much a regional market. It's no longer this idea of globalization. We've seen many of the European banks scale back their activities in Asia-Pacific, and we've seen the American banks do likewise. But the good news is that the Asian banks are in very, very good shape, and we're seeing that slack taken up by banks in places like Singapore, Taiwan, and Australia. So I think that refinancing cliff is not such a major problem, assuming there's not an absolute meltdown in the Eurozone.
Well, are you sure that the Asian banks, as you mentioned, they can take up the slack? Do they have the resources?
Yeah, the markets are very robust at the moment, and I think we're seeing a lot more local currency issuance. It used to be very much a US dollar dominated market, and we're seeing more and more local currency markets really come to the fore. In fact, you're very kind to mention my own bank's position in the markets, but typically we find that the Indian banks are top of the league tables at the moment because the domestic Indian rupee market is so huge. So we're seeing a big market in India for rupees, a big market in China for renminbi. The Taiwanese market is very strong in local currency, and this is a trend really across the whole of Asia Pacific. So all the banks in those domestic markets have very strong local liquidity. So I think the impact upon their dollar funding is really minimal.
Tell me something, John. How does this translate? What's the read-through that we get about the overall state of A, corporate, B, also the economy?
Well, the corporates haven't been borrowing very much, Rish. I think one of the problems that us loan bankers would like to see is a little bit more issuance. Of course, everybody's been sitting on their hands a little bit in terms of waiting to see what happens. But we are seeing quite a good level of M&A activity at the moment, as you mentioned earlier. I think we're going to see a lot of activity from Chinese corporates as they look to move into the resources sector overseas and look in the food and agri sector as well. So I think that's a very exciting development. And we're going to see, I think, some of the Indian names come back again into the international markets. They've been pretty quiet. You know, you're absolutely right. The economies across Asia are slowing down. But I still think that the average corporate is in extremely good shape, very strong credit, a lot of cash on hand. And we're really just waiting for some of these guys to start to move and deploy some of that money. And I think we're going to see a lot more M&A, which will really drive the loan market in the second half of this year.
John, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, but thank you so much for your thoughts. John Corrin there from ANZ Bank.